Fever Fridays here on Locked On Women's Basketball. The Fever, very inconsistent of late. What is going on? Is there a reason for this? Can they shake it? And a lot of discussion about off-ball Caitlin Clark. I would like to provide a little bit of a different take on that. We'll get to all of it today on Locked On Women's Basketball.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Tony East here. I cover the Indiana Fever for the last 5 years. Back today on what we are calling here on Locked On Women's Basketball, Fever Fridays. Some teams every day of the week here, along with our usual scheduled programming here on this feed, where you can get the latest from around the women's basketball world, and one day dedicated to the Indiana Fever and their very strange season. Last week, at this exact time, checked in after a win over the Aces, Commissioner's Cup win over the Lynx. Things are looking great. Caitlin Clark's on the mend. Woohoo! Up come the Fever. All right, yeah, and back down they go for another week of recovery, losses, inexplicable, inconsistent play. What is going on with this team? I have some takes on their inconsistency, and I have lots of takes, and I have a lot of data that I want to talk about on what I would consider the question I'm getting asked the most by fans right now, which is Caitlin Clark's off-ball play with the Fever. I thought that would be a big topic with her playing this week with Howard Megdal for the first times. And I think that will continue to be something to monitor as the Fever work through this, because that is the first thing to start with. Like, she just played with Howard for the first time, right? Obviously, it's not going to look amazing, perfect, let's go right away with two players like that. They play later tonight. Perhaps it looks better tonight. And this whole segment you're about to hear doesn't sound so sharp. But I want to run through why I actually kind of understand this, right? Because I really wanted to investigate the idea and the numbers behind Caitlin Clark off ball, what hasn't worked. Because you watch the Fever play, and the Fever opponents are, rightly, I think, pressing Caitlin Clark 94 feet, but no one else on the Fever. Sometimes Kelsey Mitchell, right? And then when she gets rid of it during a set, they just stick with her in a way that they wouldn't really with anyone else on the team. Like, she is the biggest threat, obviously. You know, she's one of the best guards in the league. And so if she is off the ball, I'll say this phrase again more later, but to get into more detail on it right now, oftentimes the Fever are basically playing 4-on-4. Like, if Caitlin Clark goes and stands in the corner off the ball, she's being face guarded or guarded very tightly that far from the play, because if she gets open, she's so efficient, right? I think she leads the league, or is near or maybe it's points per possession on unassisted baskets, right? Like, she's a masterful shot creator. She gets a sliver of space. She can score. So the rest of the players are basically playing like those, like Clark and her man aren't even there, right? They're playing 4-on-4 effectively. We'll get back to that. So I understand why the Fever would say, well, sometimes we need to work in other things, because that is an advantage for us with that 4-on-4 stuff. Like, Ari was really good. Has been really good with the Fever as an attacker. Kelsey Mitchell's having an all-star level season. Like, they have other guards capable of punishing stuff, but it hasn't worked quite as well. So let me dive into the bottom of this, because I actually think the answer to the equation of why Clark off the ball has been pooey is defense. And one other thing that a lot of people, I think, are rightly talking about when it comes to the struggles here. So first of all, I wanted to start investing in this. This isn't a perfect way to do it, because Kelsey Mitchell exists and is not really a point guard. But I wanted to start this investigation by looking at lineups the Fever have played with 2 point guards on the floor, right? They were playing Colson and Clark together at times earlier in the season. They've played now, finally, McDonald and Clark together, albeit only for 12 minutes, and see what actually is going on there. Like, is this going well? And so one of Caitlin Clark on the floor, and then either Colson or McDonald sharing the floor with her. The Fever have played 62 minutes in that alignment this season. They've lost those minutes by 26 points. Their offensive rating, 93. Not good. Not good. Their defensive rating, 113.8. Awful. Atrocious. Just terrible, right? The defense is actually worse than the offense is bad. But regardless of just the generic net rating numbers, the interesting part of this that I wanted to work through is the reason I started there is because the theory of Caitlin Clark off the ball is there's another point guard that can apply pressure and make the offense hum. Well, the numbers don't actually really quite suggest that, right? When Clark is playing with another point guard this year, with either Colson or McDonald, her usage rate, so her involvement per possessions, is 31.6%. So just under a third of the possessions, she is finishing the play with something, right? When she is playing with neither of Colson or McDonald on the floor, her usage rate is 28.5. It's actually been in other lineups. And in some ways, this intuitively makes sense because if it's not Colson or McDonald, it's usually a play finisher who would finish a play, like a Hull or a Mitchell or whatever. But her usage rate, actually sharing the floor with a point guard, is higher. Right, she is on the ball more. Now, look, I can watch the game and tell you that usage doesn't feel the same, right? Maybe it isn't as effective. Maybe it isn't as, tailor-made to Caitlin's successors. But, like, it's not actually necessarily that when she plays with another point guard like Aries, she's, like, totally shifted off the ball and taken out of the play. We'll get to the specifics of that usage in a way that I think are wrong. But that is, the numbers say that it's more about how she's being used when she's off the ball than the actual amount she's doing it. And I think that is a key distinguishing thing to make because the offense isn't great. The defense is the bad part and the usage stays. Here is, to me, the perplexing part of this, right? Who do you think, on balance, has been the Fever's best player? Remove Caitlin Clark from the equation because I don't want to, include that in this. Besides her this year, the Fever's best player, I think everybody would say, has been Aaliyah Boston, right? Aaliyah's been fantastic this season in so many ways. Play finisher, patience in the paint, defense, better passing, like every single thing that she could do to be better has happened. Aaliyah Boston, when she plays with Clark and no other point guard on the floor, Aaliyah's usage rate is 22.2. I honestly think that's a little low. It should be a little higher, but she's involved about a quarter of the time. She is asked to finish a play or be involved in the action. When 2 point guards are on the floor, right, one of Clark and another point, Aaliyah Boston's usage is 13.7%. That's the third lowest of any player in those lineups. That's lower than Dantas, Cunningham, McDonald, Bonner, who's gone, Hall, Timpson, Mitchell, and Howard. That is the part that I think I've seen the criticisms of Clark off ball that feel the most right is when Clark is off the ball, the thing that is lost, the usage that is lost, is not Clark getting shots or Clark finishing plays. It's Clark's synergy with Aaliyah Boston. And so that is what the Fever need to find a way to get back to is if Clark is off the ball and they're using her as a decoy, when she does get it, Aaliyah needs to be on the strong side or setting a screen or involved in a way that makes them both a threat still, because that is what is the most lost, is her own involvement in those plays. Other guards do not have the same synergy with Aaliyah Boston. Other guards haven't been able to get her involved, and Aaliyah's been awesome this season. Like if you include total impact, because she's played way more games than Caitlin, I would say she's had the biggest total impact, maybe not per possession, on the Fever this season than any other player. And yet in these alignments with 2 point guards, it hasn't been there. And that is, to me, the biggest part of what's going on here is when they get to 2 point guards, they really they can keep Clark involved. They can have that point guard be involved. They really struggle to get the bigs going. It's not quite as flow from post player to guard to post player to screen, whatever you want to say. That is where I feel like Caitlin Clark off ball has been the biggest problem for the Fever. Now, the other part I wanted to dive into is a lot of the numbers I started with were about Caitlin playing with another point guard, specifically Aries McDonald or Sydney Colson. Kelsey Mitchell also has the ball a good amount and should, by the way. Kelsey Mitchell's a fantastic player. Kelsey Mitchell doesn't really impact this, right? The on-off numbers with her alongside Clark aren't really a change. With Clark and Mitchell on the floor together, Clark's usage is 29. With Clark and Mitchell, or with Clark on, Mitchell off, Clark's usage is 29.4, like negligible difference. They have been able to figure out how to play together across the last couple of years. So that's not really a thing either. And to go back to what I said earlier about the team playing 4-on-4 when Clark's off the ball, she does help the other guards. Like, she hasn't played with Aries enough to really dive into those stats. It's only been 12 minutes, so that's too small of a sample to care. But she's played enough with Kelsey Mitchell to say, when they share the floor together, Kelsey Mitchell's 3-point percentage jumpers are going to go in basically regardless of who you're playing with. Maybe they're a little more contested, but the lane is more open in those 4-on-4 settings that I described earlier, right? When Mitchell and Clark play together, 255 minutes, Mitchell's 2-point percentage, 50%. That's above her season average by, not a lot, but a little bit, right? She's better. She's got easier twos in those situations. Sydney Colson, in her minutes with Clark, is shooting 60% on twos. That's not well above, but that's 7.5% above her season average, right? The paint is more open. The floor is more open, right? So what do I think, right? Here's what I just went through what the numbers say and how it, in theory, could help the rest of the team. What do I think? What does Tony East think? I think that some Clark off ball is a necessary thing the Fever need to do, right? If she can't play, that now that there's a full season of tape on her in the W, teams know what the best way to slow her down if that's even possible, is, if she has to fight that 94 feet of pressure and handling around screens the whole game, she'll be gassed and she won't be as effective. Like a little bit, Clark off ball is a necessary evil. The balance might be a little too off right now, but I don't think it's crazy for it to happen. However, they've got to figure out how to keep Aaliyah involved in these actions when things are going on, right? They've got to be, and the other part of it is the rest of the team needs to be better in these 4-on-4 settings that are created by Clark's mere existence and pressure. That hasn't been as good. That's why their offensive rating's only 93 in those settings. The other part of this is, if they were just better on defense, like 113 is a terrible, terrible defensive rating, right? That was the defensive rating with Clark sharing the floor with another point guard this season. 113 would be the worst defensive rating in the league, worse than Connecticut, right? If they were better on defense, they'd be in transition more, they'd be scoring more. Like, it would all look better. Those moments and those lineups would look better. So to me, part one of Clark off ball looking better is the rest of the stuff going better. Better defense, better Fever play on offense when she is away from the play. But they've got to get the balance right for sure. And they've got to, in those alignments, figure out how to convert those possessions into her natural strength, whether that's playing with a big like Boston, whether that's getting her in the flow and not, her being unable to get back into the play. That other stuff has to be better. So I do understand why there's a lot of frustration about her not touching the ball, because she is maybe the best player with the ball in the league, right? Obviously, Caitlin Clark should have the ball as often as feasibly possible. That does not overexert her or make the Fever worse, obviously. But there has to be a right balance found, and there has to be better execution at basically every other part of the game in those alignments. And I think there will be, right? Her and Ari have played one game together, getting a little bit of cart ahead of the horse with all this. But it's been such a big topic of discussion that I think it had to be dived more into. That's my take. That's what the numbers say. I'm happy to cite any sources, but I use PBP stats, play-by-play data for a lot of this stuff, and that is where a lot of this comes from. Other topic to me that is jarring. A week ago, again, on this very feed, we're talking about, wow, the Fever guarded the Aces and the Lynx really well. They're rounding a corner. Clark's going to return. Look at this. Here they come. The team that everybody thought they could be. No, just kidding. Very inconsistent Indiana Fever team this year. What's going on? How can they find their high peaks more than their low lows? And what makes them inconsistent? How do they get over it? That's coming up next year on Locked On Women's Basketball. But before we talk about any of that, we need to talk about the great folks over at Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to the ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. It's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes that all possible. They make buying tickets for games fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch. Game Time has incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. They're an official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, which makes it easy to browse the app for exciting upcoming MLB games, wherever your market is, wherever you're a fan of. They have the seat views in the app so you'll know exactly where you'll be and what you'll see. Last-minute tickets, zone deals for savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. How about that? Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here on Locked On Women's Basketball, talking the Fever on Fridays. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today and every single day, or second listen, Locked On NBA, to hear about the NBA playing games. Las Vegas Summer League going on the men's side. Vegas Aces playing this weekend. I'm in Vegas right now, so I'm in the center of it. I might go to that Aces. I think they play the Valkyries on Saturday. I might tune into that game. Speaking of the Valkyries, they just smoked the Fever by 19 in the Camp Day game on Tuesday. Nice start for the Fever. For a good first quarter, I literally tweeted and posted, whoa, look at the speed of the Fever. They look great. They got up at noon. They're flying around. They scored 23 in the first quarter. They scored 28 across the next two quarters. They did not hit 20 in a single quarter the rest of the game. Oh, they looked rough in that one. They shot 31% from the field, couldn't make three, 14 turnovers. Yuck. 80 points allowed is not great, but it's not bad. Like, you can win a game with the Fever's offensive potency giving up 80. But they couldn't score. Their leading scorer had 12 points. And it was Kelsey Mitchell, who had one of the worst Kelsey Mitchell quarters I've seen from her in her last three All-Star seasons in the second quarter of that game. after a good start to the game. This is right after, again, a week removed from them beating the Aces and the Lynx. In between, they lost to the Sparks. Huh? This is the Fever season in a nutshell. Is they are so weirdly inconsistent. They have beaten basically all of the best teams, right? Sort the league by net rating. Lynx are first, Fever beat them. Liberty second, Fever beat them. Dream third, Fever beat them. Mercury fourth, they haven't played. Fever are fifth. Storm sixth, Fever beat them. Right? The top 6 teams includes the Fever, but the Fever have beaten every single team they've played in that range. But they also have the worst net rating in the league. The Sun, they've beaten the Fever. The Sparks are the third worst. They've beaten the Fever twice. The Mystics are fifth worst. They've beaten the Fever, right? The Wings the Fever got out of. The Sky the Fever have handled. But the inconsistency in terms of beating the best teams and losing to the worst is so peculiar. And like they bookend, the Wings have a bad net rating, but they started what on 11, I believe, and then have been pretty good since, right? I think they're 5-4 since. And the Fever are one of those 4 losses. Like they beat a good Wings team and not the horrible Wings team. So that was like a good win. So they beat the Wings, they beat the Lynx and looked awesome in that game. They destroyed the Aces and then bookend that 3-game win streak with losses to the Sparks. And the Sparks are not playing well and have not been to string together any wins unless they're playing the Fever, right? A third of the Sparks wins this season are against the Fever. A third of the Sun wins this season are against the Fever. It is just so peculiar the way that this Fever team has been so inconsistent, right? Why? If they're losing to the worst teams and beating the best, why is this happening? First and foremost, let me do what I did last time. Let me insert my own opinion, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the team thinks, how they can be better in this way. So thing one, I used to believe in sports that an inconsistent team was just a bad team, right? If you're inconsistent because you're not that good, and so sometimes variance just helps you win, and like, okay, great. I don't believe that anymore, especially in the ways that the Fever are inconsistent, right? And the Pacers, they're the NBA team in market for the Fever. They kind of taught me that 2 years ago. They were the same as this Fever team, honestly. They could beat great teams, and they would lose to bad teams all the time. That happened to them this year a little bit too. The thing is, when you get to the playoffs, assuming you make it, you only play good teams. And so the Pacers made the conference finals, and then the next year they made the NBA finals. And so they're still kind of searching for that consistency themselves. But that made me realize, like, inconsistent doesn't mean you're bad. Right? It does. It's still a bad thing not to be able to bring the same level of play every single night in whatever league you're in. But it did kind of teach me that there is more to it than that. Okay, that's thing one. So I don't think the Fever are just bad, right? Old Tony would have thought that. The Fever can clearly be good, right? They've had some great defensive peaks. Their offense in the Liberty win was just sublime. Like, they have clearly shown a high level of play at their best. However, I'm having personal trouble figuring out kind of when or why their consistency has been fading and coming back, right? Like, think back to last year's team that started 1-8 or 2-8, whatever it was. And they started so slow out of the gate, and then they were really consistent the rest of the way. When should that start coming for the Fever? It's kind of happening to Dallas right now in the same way. But the thing is, last year's Fever team was way healthier, right? They had no injuries for a lot of the start of the season, and that kind of helped them build some chemistry and togetherness. I think that is probably the headlining reason why I think that this year's Fever team hasn't quite gotten the consistency flow yet. In and out for so many players. Cunningham early in the season, even in preseason, that's a new player. Stephanie White missed 2 games. Their head coach, right? I don't know how much impact that would truly have, but it's not nothing. Clark has obviously missed a ton of time this year, nearly half their games. In and out for lots of other. Demiris Dantas goes overseas, right? Aaron McDonald in and out because of her contract situation, right? There's more to it, but they just haven't been able to, in that way. Bonner situation, I keep thinking of more as I'm talking, right? They haven't had like their whole team, like, at all. That's something Stephanie White was really excited about with Dantas coming back from AmeriCup play, is the whole Fever team would be back, right? And so Clark has only played 10 games this season. It took, remember, they were 2-8 last year, 1-8. It took about 10 games for them to start finding consistency and looking good. It's totally possible to me that literally at any minute they could start to play good and do it a lot with their team healthy and all that. But yikes. Like, I expected them to be more consistent than this with more experience, and it hasn't happened. So I have more to say on this, but instead of hearing from me, why don't we hear from Sydney Colson and Natasha Howard, 2 champs in this league, about what the Fever need to be just a little more consistent.
Sid, I'll start with you. You guys around the losses to them came around a 3-game win streak that you guys felt pretty good about how you played, but those 2 losses kind of shows some inconsistencies for you guys. How do you guys get more consistent as a team? Is that something you can practice? How does that come?
Yeah, I think it's just like gradually it's gonna happen over time. Like we've seen throughout the course of our season, there have been peaks and valleys, but you try to lessen how many valleys there are, and we're trying to get to a point where we're having more peaks. But I think the last 2 games part of this are more indicative of who we're becoming and the direction that we're going in. But it's not going to be perfect all the time. But in games like this, we just have to have a different level of focus from the start, especially when we know that, a team has already won on our home court. It's like you got to lock in, whether it's fatigue, you're tired, not as focused. Like we just got to check ourselves and one another and make sure that we're really honed in on what we're supposed to be doing so that we can start putting full 40s together.
Natasha, a couple of these close losses the last few weeks. Have you noticed any themes late in these games that is something you guys need to correct to get over the hump in these clutch time ones?
Absolutely. Keeping them on the free throw line. And just taking care of ball at the end of the stretch. That's the main thing that we've been talking about over and over again.
Always appreciate player insight. And I think they're right in some ways. They've got to figure it out. And they have shown, like Colson said, they can hit a high level. And they know they can do it. And they know it's a part of their DNA that good defense leads to their good offense and vice versa. And that's what to me is missing a lot of the time. Their defense fades the fastest, but they just had an offensive loss to Golden State. So I have a couple more thoughts on their inconsistency. I asked Stephanie White about it as well. The quote you just heard, by the way, was after the Sparks game last weekend. So keep that in mind. But the same one from Stephanie White coming up in just a second will also be coming from after that game. We're back here on Locked On Women's Basketball. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day, coming at you every Friday here for Fever Fridays on this feed. I host Locked On Pacers as well. If you're into the Fever and basketball, pro basketball in Indiana, that might be interesting to you. Okay, the inconsistency stuff, just bizarre for this Fever team, right? After 2 high wins, they lose to the Sparks. And I wanted to ask Stephanie White, as a coach, can you coach consistency? Like, how do you get your team to give you the same level every single night? Here's what she had to say about it.
I mean, these 2 losses surrounding that 3-game win streak you guys had, 2 of those against 2 of the better record teams in the league. What does it take to get a team to be more consistent, especially from you on the coaching side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. There's always got to be a high attention to knowing personnel. Oftentimes you don't get a lot of practice time, and so going over a lot of their sets, which you do, but at the end of the day, making sure we know our personnel, who we're going to run off the 3-point line, what we're willing to give up. We've got to make sure that there's a high attention to detail there. I think the other piece is, making sure, again, that we continue to encourage our team to be disruptive. I felt like LA moved the ball too easily. And I don't mean disruptive like physicality. I just mean not allowing them to just move the ball wherever they wanted it to. Our ball pressure made it difficult. I thought they did a great job of exploiting matchups. Really working, especially with Stevens and Jackson when they had smaller players on them. Making sure that their passes were on time, on target, recognizing it early. And we did not do a good enough job of getting them out of there as quickly as we'd like to. But, also offensively, their length affected us. Our decision-making wasn't great. We over-penetrated at times. We had some reads that were there that we didn't see. And that's an area we just got to continue to grow.
Both Sydney and Natasha said you guys fouled too much. The numbers, we could see that. When you see that happening a lot, is it a defensive breakdown, so you're late and you foul? What do you feel like thematically led to that happening too often today?
Yeah, today. It's been like all season.
Yeah.
I feel a couple things. One, sometimes we're late at the point. We're not moving when the ball moves or moving when our player moves, and so that unnecessarily puts us in rotation. Sometimes we get a little too we get a little too, I don't know, anxious, so to speak. Like if somebody's attacking us, instead of making them hit tough shots over the top of us and living with that, because they're the best players in the world, right? They're going to hit really good shots. We try to like finish that play with whether it's a block or whether it's, sliding in at the last moment, or whatever else. And sometimes we just have to live with knowing that great players are going to make really good plays, and don't bail them out by fouling. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll miss. But there's a lot of things that go into that. At the end of the day, we got to be more disciplined. I didn't feel like we guarded our yard very well. I felt like we had times where we got them going the direction that we wanted to, and we bailed them out by fouling. But they did a good job of continuing to just put their head down and attack us and force us into those fouls.
I included that second question in there too, just because I asked it, but it's not as relevant to this conversation. Regardless, they clearly know that the inconsistency is there, and they're trying to iron it out. That's easier said than done. And I think that the trouble for the Fever is they all know the reasons. Part of it being that lineup stuff I mentioned with players being in and out. So it's just a very perplexing thing for this team to figure out. Is they have shown at their absolute best they can beat anybody. As Sophie Cunningham has said, given the Fever status in the league, they're going to get their opponent's best punch every night. Like, they've got to be on their A game to be winning and to be crushing people. Like, they were really good down the stretch of last season. I think the record was the 4th or 5th best in the league after their 1-8 start last year. That was last year's team. I think this team is more talented on paper, but they haven't quite found that groove. And I think that they will with health and with time, but they've got to figure it out. So some other parts of this, right, that are very confusing is obviously the results from one game to the next have been a little confusing. What's going on with that? But the secondary part of this that's really perplexing to me is sometimes their consistency or their level of play comes and goes within one game, right? The Sparks game that I'm asking these questions after was their second Sparks game. The first Sparks game they played, I think the Fever allowed 50 points through 3 quarters. They were forcing a bunch of turnovers. Their defense looked sharp. And then LA scored 35 in the fourth quarter, and they were hitting layup after layup and breaking down the defense. And like, their Fever just fell apart. Their defense looked horrible in the fourth quarter of that game. The Golden State game they just played, it was their first quarter that was good, and then immediately they just fell off a cliff. They couldn't score. Their offense died for the rest of the game. That is what's confusing to me. Is I guess I can understand game-to-game inconsistency a little bit more. Like, your prep is different, the film is different, your opponent's different. Maybe there's something about what they're doing, but that's not even the case. It's like within one game. That also is troubling for me, right? Usually I would say it's the fourth quarter, but I won't even think that there's any one time where it feels like their inconsistencies pop up, right? It's not like, oh, it's always with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter, their focus wanes. Like, they're starting slow a lot. Like, they've had a lot of these problems, but like I just said, it was the fourth quarter of that first Sparks game. It was the first quarter of that Golden State game, or really the second quarter, I guess, is when it flipped poorly for them. It's just different pockets. Like, they started slow against Minnesota in the Commissioner's Cup game, and then they picked it up, right? Like, it's just a different time of every game. So it's not like it's their opponent. It's not like it's something that's going on. It's just at some point they turn it on and at some points they don't. That's really strange. And so it's just kind of random when it happens. That is perplexing to me. And it's not like, they get hit hard and they don't know what to do. The other part of it is it's not just like it's one player or it's the same group of 5 on the floor that it usually happens. It's not like it's like every time the bench comes in, they fade away. Or every time the starters come back in after the bench is out there, they fade away. Like, it's different scenarios every time. And that's why it's a team-wide something that they have to get over, right? It's like they get hit hard, get hit with a big punch from their team, and they stop playing their own way. They start to play, not hero ball, that's a stretch, but just they all try to solve the problem themselves instead of playing Fever basketball. And that's what they've got to figure out, is how to consistently play Fever basketball, because at their best, they've proven that can beat opposing teams, and I think they need to remember that in those moments when they're getting hit hard by another team. They can do it, but they haven't. And so to me, the two biggest things to keep an eye on going forward as this team plays 2 more home games and then a road back-to-back going into the break is they really need to find some consistency, and some of that will just come naturally with reps together if nobody gets hurt. And they really need to figure out the right balance and execution of Clark off ball, because I personally think it's a necessary evil. If evil is even the right word, it's a necessary thing to do, but it hasn't worked just yet. Thank you for tuning in to Fever Fridays this week. Back next week with more of this. I'll be back from Vegas soonish, but I probably won't be at any more Fever home games. But then it's All-Star. How about that? So a lot of fun there with 3 Fever players playing in All-Star in Indy. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. You can find my coverage of the Fever at The Next, and I tweet about the Fever very often at Tony R. East, same handle on Bluesky. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll catch you in the next one.